Indeed, General McMaster, who served as National Security Advisor under President Donald Trump and who is now a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, joins us from Palo Alto in California. Thank you very much for being with us.
It's great to be with you, even under these difficult circumstances.
Yes. The first chapter of your latest book, Battlegrounds, The Fight to Defend a Free World, actually touches upon Russia and Ukraine. And I want to get to some comments made by Western officials in recent days. They say that Ukraine can actually win the war. Do you share that belief?
I do. In fact, we know that Russia cannot accomplish the objectives it set out to accomplish, which is to completely occupy and subjugate Ukraine and put into place a pliable puppet government. And you've seen that they've already been unable to accomplish those objectives. And what they thought would be a very quick campaign and an easy campaign has been made quite difficult because of the will and the courage of the Ukrainian people.
What is the end game for Vladimir Putin? Is it only Ukraine? Is it more than that?
It's more than that. And what he's endeavored to do since he took over 20 years ago in the year 2000 was to restore Russia to national greatness. It's been his obsession. And he's developed the capability to inflict great harm on others through its conventional military, as we've seen, through its unconventional forces, as we saw in 2014 under the cover of conventional forces, with cyber attacks, with assassinations, with campaigns of intimidation, through economic coercion. And so I describe this in Battlegrounds as Putin's playbook. He's been up to it for quite a long time, and he won't be satisfied with the subjugation of Ukraine if he were to accomplish that. So it's really important for the free world that Russia fail utterly in Ukraine.
Do you think he has his eyes on Moldova, Georgia, and other countries as well? Is this what you mean?
Absolutely. And we know going back to 2008, right? He invaded Georgia already in 2008. He invaded Ukraine in 2014. He's been engaged in a sustained campaign of subversion against the former territories of the Soviet Union and the former Warsaw Pact, but really against Europe broadly in this effort to polarize us, to break apart our alliances and to pit us against each other, even within our nations. We saw how he not only attacked the U.S. election, but of course he attacked the Ukrainian election over and over again, and the last presidential election in France as well. So Putin's theory of victory is that he could drag everybody else down and to be the last man standing, so to speak, in Europe. And you know what he assumed? He assumed disunity within Europe in the transatlantic relationship. And you know what he got? He got a lot of unity. So I think that we ought to feel pretty good about how the free world has come together to confront this blatant aggression and to work together to stop the horrible suffering and crimes against humanity that we're seeing him perpetrate in Ukraine.
Some are wondering whether he's acting rationally. Do you think he may have lost some control and that he's in a bubble, or do you think he knows exactly what he's doing?
I think he knows exactly what he's doing. Now, saying that he's rational doesn't mean he's not obsessed, right? He's obsessed with restoring Russia to national greatness and to do it with tremendous brutality, right? This is someone who has assassinated journalists, who's assassinated political opponents, who has attempted to poison his political opponent and a former KGB agent using banned nerve agents. And I think important to what's happening in Ukraine, this is someone who has already inflicted these terrible crimes on civilian populations. Remember Grozny in 1999? That was under Putin's direction before he took over as president. That resulted in 80,000 civilian deaths. Look at Aleppo in Syria and how Russia has enabled the serial episodes of mass homicide, which are the Syrian civil war. So I would say what he's doing is true to character, and we can no longer have any delusions about Vladimir Putin.
Do you think he wants to do in Kyiv what he's done in Grozny and in Aleppo?
I think he will. I think he is going to destroy some of Europe's most beautiful cities, and what he is doing now, because his army is incapable of close combat, is incapable of conducting fire and maneuver and controlling territory, gaining control of territory on the ground, he's pulling these artillery pieces and these rocket launchers into these big kind of fire bases so he can rubble these cities and commit the mass murder of civilians with this indiscriminate use of firepower. And this is something that we just can't tolerate. We have to do everything we can at this moment, I think, to help the Ukrainians contest the air. And as you mentioned, with the threat to Odessa, also contest the maritime domain.
Right. The air is obviously something that the Ukrainian president has called for. He's called for a no-fly zone. He got a firm no from NATO, from the US, from major Western countries. Is this totally off the table?
I don't think it's totally off the table, and I think the transfer of MiG aircraft, that to Ukrainian armed forces, I think that's a good step, and that should go forward. But it's also possible to contest the air from the ground, and we see that with the provision of Stinger missiles. But I know that France has one of the most capable medium-range air defense weapon systems. How about training the Ukrainians on those systems and allowing them to operate them in Western Ukraine, for example? How about drones and providing more drone capabilities so that the Ukrainians have the ability to attack these fire bases that are raining destruction down on their cities? So I think there's a lot more that can be done, and I think it's time to do it now because, as you've seen, there's tremendous human suffering. I mean, some of the estimates are that Putin is going to murder 1 million people. He's going to create 10 million refugees before this is over. We can't just sit back and watch that happen.
Right. Is the goal of the US and its allies to transform Ukraine into a new Afghanistan for Russia, hoping that it will end the same way with a Russian withdrawal? Is this by arming the Ukrainians, by going for essentially a brutal and long war?
Well, I mean, that's what the Ukrainian people have already said they're determined to do. You saw how quickly they formed these territorial forces. You see young men and young women volunteering to defend their homeland. And of course, this is not unprecedented, this kind of successful campaign, as you mentioned, Afghanistan, but I'm thinking of Finland in 1939. Or, how about Montenegro in the 1870s when they were attacked by the Ottoman Empire? So when people possess the will to defend themselves and they have the capability to do so, I think that it's impossible to defeat that will. And you see that, I think, today in Ukraine. I think Putin has already lost if the measure of his success is what he set out to achieve at the outset of this brutal assault on the Ukrainian people.
What about the use of a tactical nuclear weapon? Putin hinted that he could use nuclear weapons. We know the Russian doctrine allows for such tactical weapons use. Is this something you fear, or do you think this is just posturing by Putin?
Well, it's something we have to take seriously. But just think about how irresponsible this, so-called doctrine of escalate to de-escalate or escalation domination. As you mentioned, this is nothing new for Putin. He's been threatening this because he knows he's in a position of weakness, right? His economy is the size of the state of Texas's economy or Italy's economy. He can't compete economically, and of course, the sanctions are delivering a very difficult blow to him. I hope we sanction the hydrocarbon sector too. That's way overdue. And then also, he can't compete militarily with conventional military. And you see how this army has been in some ways a Potemkin army in terms of its ability to operate in close combat. And then of course, what is he left with? He's left with cyber attacks, and he's left with the threat of nuclear war. So we have to take it seriously. But I think that what we have to do is do everything that we can to support the Ukrainian people. And there's much more that we can do.
Right. As a last question, do you think Vladimir Putin is less firmly in power than one could think?
I don't know. I wish I knew. He's brought his inner circle very tight. Remember the old Kremlinology when we used to assess the Kremlin in the Soviet period and who was standing two away from Brezhnev and so forth? It's not like that anymore. It's really hard to tell. He doesn't look stable to me, though. I mean, you saw how he browbeat his cabinet, how he's sitting at the end of these long tables with President Macron or with his own military leadership. I mean, it looks quite odd to me. And of course, what we hope is the people around him come to their senses and tell him that he's dragging Russia down. And maybe Who knows? Maybe some leadership will emerge in Russia who will recognize that the future of the Russian people lies with the West and with Europe and lies with peace and prosperity instead of this self-destructive campaign that Putin has put them on since really the year 2000, but especially after 2007.
Right. As a conclusion, do you think he's making a historical mistake?
He's already made a historical mistake. Absolutely.
General H.R. McMaster, thank you very much for appearing